Welcome along, all of you. Had a great conference, bit of politics going on, bit of politics rolling through. Mr. Peters, I'm going to start with you, I think, first. And I say this with as much grace as I can muster. When I'm perhaps at the stage of my career that you are at, I do plan on being, in the Bay of Islands with a glass of Pinot, possibly wondering whether I'm going to do a spot of gardening. Why do you want to be back in the beehive?
Well, first of all, that's an extraordinary question. Every year, for a long time, about 10,000 people have been going to Omaha, Nebraska, to listen to a man who's now 91 years of age, and his advisor is 95 years of age, because you just might know something. His name is Warren Buffett, right? Former friend of mine has just 2 years ago retired as the Prime Minister of Malaysia, and a current friend of mine is the Prime Minister of Malaysia. One was Mahathir, and the other one is Anwar Ibrahim. And the moral of the story is, don't act your age.
Right. Well, it's good to have you here, Winston. Always enjoy your company. I'm going to put a second question to you, and I want you to answer this one for me, sir. So you've had an extraordinary career. When you look back at political leadership, and when you look back at some of our great leaders that we've had, who do you admire? Who stands out in your political career?
Actually, I thought I was here to talk about the crisis in financial services in this country and the lack of leadership and direction we've had for the last 30 years. But apparently you want to talk about my career, and I'm very happy because up till now in this campaign, I've mainly been the subject of all sorts of vilification, Cinderellisation and marginalisation, but it's not working, is it? So who do I admire? Well, to tell you the truth, I look abroad, and some of the greatest people I've admired are people who made a stand, like Gorbachev or de Klerk in South Africa. They never became the beneficiaries of it, but they made the stand that changed the world. And then in this country, there have been members of Parliament in the past, going back a long time, whose sense of nationhood, so to speak, and their long-term purpose was dedicated to improving this country. And they made this country number one in the world. And of course, if you say that these days, you could accuse of nostalgia, which is a great way of explaining that those who are running the show right now don't know what they're doing, right? Now, my point is, look, I thought that Michael Cullen was a good Minister of Finance. Can't deny that fact. He was caught by, of course, the Wall Street crisis in the time that he was there. And this was, well, not a Wall Street crisis, it was actually an inflection of deceit and fraud at Wall Street, but of course they explained it somewhat in a different way. Peter Fraser, I thought, was a brilliant Prime Minister, but Holyoake was my favourite in terms of the past, because this guy left school at a very young age, but he got on, and if you read some of his speeches, and forget about the intellectual university angst against people like that, he was a man of enormous substance. And again, I mean, I shook hands with Helen Clark, and she kept her word. I shook hands with a guy that sacked me 3 times, Jim Bolger, and he kept his word. Because in the end, on election night, can I just say this one thing? You can have all the prejudice you like, but out there are millions of people expecting for you to form a stable government. And you've just got to do your best. You've got to put your prejudice behind you. And it's really difficult if to put your prejudice behind you if your name's Winston Peters.
On the issue of leadership, Simon Bridges, Christopher Luxon, not resonating. Why not?
Yeah, look, firstly, can I just say, Kris Faafoi a little while ago said, come along to panel, you don't need to think about it before, there's no one much coming and there won't be TV cameras.
Yeah, you turned up though, didn't you?
Now I'm just banking on Winston saying something more ridiculous than me and he'll lead the news. That'll be fine. Look, yeah, let me give you a little bit on leadership and I think the election. I mean, first thing, I think if there's an election tomorrow, there'd be a change of government. Personally, I think it's going to be very close. I think you talk about Chris Luxon and the National Party. Look, the Labour Party too. We haven't seen something that we're seeing at the moment right now. Look, certainly that I can remember. Some here have got longer memories than me, but I can't remember a time when both major parties at this point weren't or at least one of them wasn't in the 40s. And so that does tell you that they have weaknesses. I mean, a couple of other brief hot
Is that
picks.
weakness Luxon, though? Is it policy? Is it leadership? Is it resignation? Is he not connecting? How can the election be sitting so close in the polls?
I think, look, in both parties they have different weaknesses. In the Labour Party, fundamentally it was a lack of being ready for government and a sense of never getting over that, really. And Winston knows all about that in terms of the Labour Party that we've got at the moment. I think, look, in terms of the National Party, I think it's an experience thing there. I don't think that's simply Chris Luxon. He's got a lot of experience, CEO. And I think there's also a sense whereby if we sit still and don't say too much, we'll be the government in a couple of months, my friends. We haven't yet, and I'm not being critical of this, but we haven't yet seen their major economic announcements. I know they came along, Chris Luxon came along here and made some announcements, but actually, after preview, after some of the budget documents, that will be a pretty important moment for Chris Luxon and his National Party.
Kris Faafoi, you left Labour, as did Ardern, but there's been a few that have been shoved: Woods, Nash, Kerry Allen. If all of those ministers have left, and if you've left, why would we vote for Labour? What do they offer?
I'll answer a different question. Look, I think the last kind of 2 months have been difficult for them, so that's a kind of different take on your question. I think certainly the last month, so I think why would people vote for Labour? I think, as I mentioned on Tuesday night when I showed the polling, there's definitely been a drop. So I agree with Simon, if it were this Saturday, things would be different. But we've got the gentleman to our right, and we've got the white-hot atmosphere of an election to come. And I think both parties, kind of agreeing with Simon, have got issues. I think you've got the last couple of months for the current government, and you've got actually with National a leader who hasn't kind of been tested in that white-hot environment, and having been a member of the press gallery, and Winston will remember me asking him questions politely around the campaign trail. That's a different kind of pressure to even what we have got today with our political leaders. You've got to, as other people on this podium, on this stage will understand, being a leader in that environment is completely different in the lead up to election day. So I think eventually we'll get close. I think if third parties, and I think they are going to play the part in it, then it's going to be interesting. But I think that on the current narrative and how the media is covering it, there's momentum in the polls.
Okay, we've got into that game of who's going to work with who. Luxon hasn't ruled anybody out. Winston.
Can I just say something? This is an amazing election because most people are getting it wrong, and the commentators more than most. It's just to give you two examples on history. In 1948, the Democrats were behind by 10 points, and the Washington Post and other papers, 3 papers, actually published that the Republicans had won, and they hadn't. This man came back from 10% behind. And then Keating's election in Australia, it's another classic. They were 10% behind on election night, they won. And we've had the same example when Morrison won recently in Australia. And I'm saying to people, if you think that one of your chosen leading parties is going to win this election, you're kidding yourself. You're not reading, you're listening to the wrong people who don't understand how this business has, and in the sense that Chris put it in this context, and so did Simon. If those parties are bumping around 30%, then this is going to be a wide open election where some fundamentals matter, and they will be sorted out in the next 7 weeks. Don't forget, polling opens on the 2nd of October. That's when the special votes happen. So.
I feel like this is a party political broadcasting.
No, but I'm just asking you, why would TVNZ be having the leaders' debate on the 5th of October when maybe 1 million people would have voted? You own the TVNZ. What on earth's going wrong with this?
Most people aren't watching TVNZ. Am I allowed to say that? Is TVNZ here? Sorry, TVNZ. Many of us.
I'll tell you what, though, Rachel. Actually, I mean, this is, we talked about the major parties. I maintain actually 3 parties are going to be required by either side to get to government at the moment. You mentioned TVNZ, TV3 as well. I also maintain these TV debates will be the most watched ever. And that's simply for all the reasons of what we've said before. Probably over time, those TV debates and the viewership's gone like that over the years. But I think what we've got right now is actually a sense in a country where the vote's very soft, where rank and file New Zealanders probably don't feel they have that great a sense of either Chris Hipkins or Christopher Luxon, and a good performance by either of them in those TV debates could have a very dramatic effect, certainly more than we've seen before
it's really
on the
interesting
election.
To say that, and I'm not being disparaging towards the TV debates, because
and I didn't feel a need to defend them, by the way.
Yeah, no, because they are of interest. But I'd question in the room how many people have made up their minds or whether they will be swung by those debates. It depends, I think, of your demographic who's watching, and your younger demographics aren't watching those debates. And that's where we've seen historically, haven't we? Labor have come out, big policies, student-free loans at the last minute or what have you, to secure that younger vote. I'm not sure just how many people are watching the older votes, but I digress. And Damien, I haven't heard from you yet. I do want to talk to you about the fact that when we have said who we will work with and who we won't. Winston, you've said you won't work with Labor. Active said that they won't work with you. Can you afford to rule out New Zealand First?
Well, we see on October 14 a National Act government taking over the Treasury and the country. That's pretty clear what David Seymour has stated. And we're more concentrating on the real issues in this country, which is inflation, which is the brutalist tax that we're experiencing. We've got to kill that. We've got to manage the cost of living here in this country. People are getting boiled like frogs slowly here. And we've really got to address the fundamentals of performing a strong economy again. In the last 6 years, the government spending has not allowed the Reserve Bank to enact its strategy properly. And we're now paying the consequences of excessive government spending. ACT's a party of smaller government. It's a party of efficiency. We can save $40 billion in 4 years to get the books back in shape. We don't need to cut frontline services. We just need more efficiency. If people in this room can tell me, apart from regulation, which is out of control, they've got better value for money in the last 6 years versus today, then, I'll take that on the chin, but I don't see that, and it hasn't happened. So a new mandate's required. The people will decide. A silent majority will go to the booth, and like always in New Zealand, they'll make their decisions. So we respect the voter for that intellectual capacity. But if you're a rural voter, you're a city voter, you've got a real responsibility to come out and tell the government it's time for a change. And a real change is needed, not just the uni-party system, which is National or Labour. I mean, if you look at the Labour Party at the moment, it's turning into the centre National Party. It doesn't even know what it stands for anymore. Its principles have been shot. Its tax strategy is awful. Capital calls are being made by Kris Hipkins.
It's interesting you say that, though, Damien. I would say, Hipkins has moved Labor far more across to the centre than where Ardern ever had it positioned. And, Luxon has come back. Many will say there's not a lot that divides the two. Simon, what's your position on that?
I think, sorry, just to finish that, I think you have to have a government that's got principles. And if Labour's moving this far, it means all they're caring about is grabbing votes, not running the country. And it's quite obvious to me that that's their strategy, and it's not treating the citizen of New Zealand with respect.
Yeah.
I could listen to that accent. It's so romantic all day. Beautiful.
Northern Irish.
I think I think to your point, I agree with you. I think if you look at the parties, what you see is whether you like what they're saying or not, we have a very clear sense what the Green Party is about today. They're going to tax the crap out of you, and they're going to try and achieve equity in their way. We know what ACT's about. They're going to get rid of lots of tax and various other things. So I think in terms of those parties, and actually once we know, because we know what he's been about for a long time now, we have a sense of what the other party's about. I don't think, quite have that sense in Labour. Chris Hipkins was doing a good job, probably for the first half of this year. Remarkable, really, when you consider how senior he was in the government over 5 years, but of shifting it and changing it and bringing it to the centre, as you say. But look, as Chris has said, he's had some big problems. I still think it's the National Party, and we kind of have a sense of that. But there's still quite a bit of policy to see to get a sense of what a Christopher Luxon government would be like, and what that would look like with these two. I think respectfully, both Winston and David Seymour somehow are going to have to find a way to work together if we do have a changed government.
Chris, it's frustrating at times, I think, for Joe Public, who you understand, like, for example, Labour believe in a capital gains tax. Just bet in and do it. And Ardern backed away from that. We see, I think, policies coming through now. It feels like what's going to get me a vote versus what's right for the country, what's right for the economy. Winston. What's that?
She never backed away from the capital gains tax.
You stopped it. Sure. Okay. But she.
Yes.
But
my version is that I smashed her in Parliament. And I stopped.
Okay.
You're all taking responsibility for it now.
Fine. But there'd be many people in this room.
Success has many fathers, Winston.
and you all know, because I got smashed by the media for being a handbrake all the time. I was so successful, they all went off. 455,000 National Party voters and voted for the Labour Party the last election. They named a guy called Winston Peters.
Yeah.
Capital gains tax is the backbone of Labour, you would think. To make, there would be people in this room who would agree a capital gains tax makes a tax system fair. That's all you want, is for a fair tax system, and it's not fair at the moment. Why don't we see the likes of Hipkins coming out? And this is why, parties aren't leaning into their true policies and beliefs, it feels. Instead, they're doing what's populist and what's going to get them the vote. And that means they're so close together.
Well, he wants to get re-elected, obviously. So, when you've only got 10 months run-up, and you're in a pretty precarious political position, he's trying to neutralise any of the issues that might stand in his way. Winston is right. When you get into government and you're a coalition government, you go into negotiations and you end up having to compromise. It was something that was done on day one, I understand, and I guess. And it kind of goes to what I was speaking about earlier in the week. I think there's some structural issues that New Zealand does need to deal with. I think there's something that we need to tend to in our electoral system to make sure that those things get done. And maybe, and I think this is an impossible task, getting some alignment from political parties, because I do think things like, some of the products and settings for some of the things that this crowd very much cares about are crucial for, as I said, infrastructure in the future, investment in the future, and making sure that families are better off. But we never seem to be able to get to those points.
Maybe that's a job for you, Chris.
No.
I agree with you that things that, like at the moment, like what happens with, with massive investment, millions into the Māori Health Authority, but we know under the Nats that'll be collapsed. I mean, how do we get some bipartisan agreement for the basic infrastructure of the country we're trying to develop without seeing everything flip-flopping? Damien?
Yeah, I mean, we need to rethink our economic model here, where we take a 30-year view on an infrastructure and we allow the private sector to participate, because the government doesn't have the balance sheet to do everything. And the government has been really quite closed in its thinking around that aspect. And, I agree with Chris that there needs to be some cross-party cooperation in that sense. But unless we attract foreign capital in, and unless we let our economy open up again, because we've been closed down for 3.5 years with COVID. It wasn't like New South Wales, where they tried to stay open, keep businesses open, keep people sane, keep them safe. We're now suffering all the lags of that. And add to that, we've got some sort of constitutional mindset coming from the Maori Party and the Greens that is totally unworkable. Everybody in New Zealand is an equal citizen. We've got one vote per person. We've got to make it all work together. We've got 5 millionths of the opportunity, and we can't keep taxing people to, to gain productivity, we've actually got to go the other way, which is allow people to take risk, allow capital to flow, allow people to develop ideas and businesses, and actually engage with our partners around Asia, because 83% of the population is on our doorstep and wants to trade with us. And I'm not saying the government's done a bad job in that area. It's just that we need to think differently now about making this a star economy.
Okay, I'm taking your questions, by the way, from the floor. Someone's just asked when your campaign for mayor starts, Simon. Winston, you wanted
couldn't pay my mortgage.
Well, I wanted to respond to that last comment because he mentions the Maori Health Authority. And whatever happens in this election, and you can concern yourself about the state of our economy, and it is a failed economy, or the state of our cost of living, and it is a crisis, or our housing crisis, or our education crisis, and dare I say it, law and order, and all the fundamentals. But there's a bigger crisis this country is facing. And it doesn't matter whether I'm meeting like you or a group of unionists. The truth, or if it is, our democracy is under terrible threat. We've got a separate system being set up, and co-government is their purpose. And if you don't and haven't followed what they're teaching at the universities and realised how it's crept secretly by an elitist cabal into our structures of policy preparation, then I'm afraid there's a disaster coming. By that I mean, can I just say this? Why was the Auckland Super City started with an unelected Maori ward? Why have we got the foreshore and seabed legislation now with change that the National Act and the Maori Party brought in with 600 claims on the coast? Why have we got all this thing going on? Because we'll never get on top of any problem in this election, after this election, unless we fix our democracy first. And we're one of the greatest democracies in the world, but it's corroding in front of our face. And that's not alarmism. It's from somebody who for 42 years has watched this happen.
And for 42 years, you would have also seen the impact of urbanisation on Māori as well. I mean, we're a broad church that is democracy. So we do need to understand and acknowledge, I think, that how Māori have been disproportionately affected.
With respect, I come from that background. I know what poverty tastes and smells like. I went to a Maori school, and all my background, I started in a career representing Maori and European.
You're the minority.
And one of the biggest land cases in this country. But what I won't see is inverted racism, which suggests that you, as a Maori, can't get there, as Simon has and I have, without doing it ourselves. That's why we're different. We are for one people, one country, one nation, one vote.
Yes, and everybody deserves belonging in this country and to be enabled as well. I don't want to go down the race route. I understand what you're saying because, I fundamentally think that it's through the eyes of a mother. I'm very frustrated about the state of social cohesion in this country. That's my concern for my 14-year-old. Simon, you're welcome.
Winston talked about crisis in New Zealand. Look, I go with him. I think, though, what the crisis is, the biggest crisis New Zealand faces at the moment, is a crisis in confidence. It's a sense, actually, that we've lost our mojo. I was at Canterbury this week. I was surprised to see there was that sense there amongst a very big farming community. We aren't sure of ourselves. And a sense, and I don't want to feed into it too much, but it's there. I think it's undeniable that our better days are gone, right? And to me, that's kind of what this election's about. I think that's based on, yes, some substantive issues in post-COVID period and things going on, but I also think it's possibly the sentiment is worse than the reality. And I think what we need from whoever forms the government is a sense that they have big, bold, positive ideas, which I'd like to see more of in the next 2 months, that will help ensure that the education problems we've got will be dealt with, the health issues, the economic ones, and that's what we need to see in the next couple of months.
Nature of an election, though, and we all feel it, I think, is that in the desire for power, to retain it, to gain it, we divide. And I think our society is more divided than we've probably ever been, particularly off the back of COVID. Kris, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this.
I think we're going to get back to the space where we can all be happy to disagree with each other. And I think, fueled by many things, social media, I think the media, I think politicians, I think just the general trauma that the country has been through in the last 3 years has got people extremely niggly. I kind of said on Tuesday afternoon, everyone's kind of grumpy and lumpy. That's how it feels. But at risk of agreeing with Simon too much. I do think,
It is often a bad space.
yeah, I know.
You're right.
Well, I'll keep it short. But, I do think there is some hope, and some of the speakers that we've heard this week have said that there's some economic good news on the horizon, which I think is good to hear. We've got to kind of drag ourselves through some course for the next 12 months to get there. But I think, is it a crisis of confidence? That's one way of putting it. But, I think we just need a bit of time to kind of agree to disagree and drag ourselves through some pretty difficult economic times because, if you can't afford to pay the rent or put food on the table, then everything else becomes irrelevant and you get stressed. And I think that's what we're seeing out there.
And just very briefly, the irony is actually in the political class, if you can call that, there's possibly less separating the Green Party and Winston than either would care to suggest, in the Parliament at least.
Here we go.
We get it. What I mean is we actually rub along quite well. I don't hate this guy. I quite like this old crocodile. It's... the political class is more homogenous than we might care to think.
Anything to say about that?
Yeah.
Well, can I just say, look, sound environmentalism is good economics. It always has been. But the trouble with the Greens is, they want to change this new world and go forward with resilience, but the very utility to get there is mining. It's critical. You cannot go anywhere without mining. But they're anti-mining. And the problem is there's a genuine side of the Greens, then there's a bunch of communists with which I will never deal.
Tell us what you really think.
Fair comment.
Okay.
Fair comment.
That's possibly something that everyone can agree on here. There is key major issues, though, and that is the point we're trying to make. We're buggering around the fringes with smaller issues when we do have a health system that's on its knees. We do have youth offending that's off the charts. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got so many different areas around health, around housing, big ticket issues that we need to address. And Kris, how do we do that how do we decide who to vote for when no one's got any majorly, I don't think, strong policies to shift this?
Well, they need to start talking about it, People might not agree with fresh fruit and vegetables. It sounds populist. I don't necessarily care about cell phones in schools. I think, we need to see some policy announcements. I think, again, gosh, Simon, sorry. Some stuff with some meat on it.
Yeah. And is it just because are we going to expect to see this after, I don't know, when we see more from the government's books in September? Why haven't we heard more about it now, Simon? Are you on the phone? We need some policies here of substance.
I won't say anything about that, but I think, we just invited agreement here. I think, Kris makes a very good point. We've seen these quite tactical announcements from the major parties, right? They're these bespoke things to get a headlines on. Call me old school, but, my view of politics has always been, a good, strong announcement should go on for days.
Yeah.
These guys struggle to get past 24 hours with their announcements on kind of all sides of the House at the moment. And I'll give Winston, maybe having been slightly mean before, a compliment. I also think, and to be fair, look, the major leaders probably are doing a bit of this, but it's good to see actually political party leaders like Winston fronting up to town halls around the country and hearing what people actually think. I'm not sure. I worry that the political class have lost a bit of that in recent times.
What are you hearing on the sentiment when you're out in and around the town hall?
Well, it's amazing. I mean, we always knew. Don't get me wrong about this, but I'm put the cards on the table. The New Zealand media are not what they used to be. It's awfully sad because they've been denied the money for intensive research and investigation and the time to do it. And seriously, great journalism is dying in our country, and it's not just a New Zealand phenomena. But we always knew that the only way to get cut through, because they have never printed one speech I've made in the last 2 years. Yet we're out in the halls, packing the halls all around this country. You can go on my Facebook, you'll see it. Now, there's something wrong when you're deliberately being marginalised by attacks from the media, but never ever telling the public what I said. And, Phil Collins' great song, you've got to hear both sides of the story. Well, that's all the media is meant to be doing, telling you what everybody's saying so you can make up your mind. And that's what's wrong with this campaign. But the great thing about it, Simon, I was down in Tauranga the other day, we've got over 750. Remember that one? Just 2 weeks ago, That's what politics should be about, because it's called consulting the people, it's called democracy, and it's not happening. People are going to a school, and the media are all there watching this leader in front of 5-year-olds who can't vote. And it's on the 6 o'clock news, for goodness sake.
They might one day.
What I would say about media is the media's dishing up what you are all clicking on.
What we need is some kind of big state broadcaster.
Yeah, like
With integrity.
Yeah, totally. You know, and so that's the beast that you're feeding. If you keep clicking on those stories about Kim Kardashian, then the system keeps serving them up to you. So I hear what you're saying.
But here's the question: the media, with the greatest respect, I mean, I don't want to turn into Winston.
Here we go.
You know, on the media, but should always be asking, and what's your policy?
Yeah.
And give us the details. Because, by the way, last time I checked, we're a couple of months from the election.
Totally. Why don't your parties come together and put that to the media, side by side?
Well, I just have. There they are. There.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
One of the things that we find when we go out to do our public meetings is there's just a sheer anger out there at people's lives being, the Kiwi way of life being totally destroyed and disrupted. Things like Three Waters. I mean, one of the most disappointing aspects I've found being in Parliament as an MP is the agenda that's been set in terms of ownership of assets. Just to clear up on the Māori economy, it's doing pretty well, actually. 32% of our GDP is now related to that on 16% of the population. So it's a myth that Māoris aren't doing well in business or can't do well professionally. I'm an immigrant. The whole country is made up of immigrants, and it's a big melting pot of a multi-ethnic society. So the Ardern government took the agenda far too far in terms of the Maorification of everything. And I think they have lost out in that argument because, sorry, I know you can talk about it at schools, but I think the kids are fine in terms of playing rugby together, sitting in the classroom together. They're not the issue. It's us adults that need to get a grip on what New Zealand is about. And it's got a way of living its life, and we need to bring that back.
I want to bring up the issue about Three Waters, because that's been played out. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got, and forgive the language, but we've got shit on the streets in Wellington. We've got major issues there. We've got people with Campylobacter in Hawke's Bay where people died. Why did we block the idea around Three Waters and do nothing?
I'll give you the reasons.
The paralysis by analysis. We're doing nothing, and our water's terrible.
Two reasons. One is there is a water quality authority set up now, which I think can do the job. What I disagree with is that the assets that belong to the people and the communities who they've paid for are better managed at a local level than at a central government level. If you have to make a phone call from Nelson to get a pipe fixed in Wellington, it's all over. And all these people who are elected onto these boards, these 10 new water entities, they've got no experience of water management. And the inflated salaries of the chief executives are just going to lead to a duplication of resources that aren't going to go into investment. Plus, the economic model is going to actually, Fitch has said, it's going to send us bankrupt.
Was to leverage the government, central government's balance sheet to be able to build the infrastructure, because the local we can't.
Local governments should be allowed to fund that themselves. And local government should be the vehicle for that. The central government has no transparency or clarity over that.
Sure, but then, we've just been through the floods in Auckland where our sewage ended up with our stormwater.
That's fine, that's an emergency response.
No, it's not fine.
Yeah, but I mean, that was a flash flood, right?
We get into this roundabout, though, where, if local government ever wants to do anything, they say, we need central government to kind of help us. And then if central government gets in the way, it's like, well, get out of our way, we know what we're doing. It's like, well, so stop for a second. There's obviously an issue that's kind of built up over generations that needs to be dealt with. Aside from the politics, as you say, there's towns that simply cannot afford to make sure that the basics of life are there.
Yeah, but there's towns
like
there's cities like
Politics gets in the way.
who have done a brilliant job of water management, and now they're going to get their assets taken away.
And I think a couple of things I draw on for this conversation. I mean, first thing is, it's amazing how much ACT and Winston have in common. They'll make great coalition partners. They agree on all of this, seems to me. Number one. Number two, I mean, I do want to pull, because we've been too nice to each other, Kris and I, here. I do want to pick up on something Kris said earlier, just to even the score, having been, it's sometimes pretty fair, I think, and objective about my former party. Kris made an offhand comment that, look, actually, Labor's problems come back to a couple of bad months. Actually, no, it comes back to a failure to deal with this issue, a failure to build infrastructure, a failure to deal with the education system, the health system, the economy in a competent, comprehensive way.
They would argue that small issue of a global pandemic.
Thank you.
So that's a cover-all for everything, isn't it? Nothing else needs to matter over that period of time. It's all fine.
It's perspective, though. That was the first 3 or 4 years.
No, we have to be objective about this. Sydney had the same pandemic. They've come out in much better shape. Other states in Australia have. Melbourne hasn't, because they also had restricted policies. So, look, people will have their own views of them, but I, for one, certainly don't accept that as a full excuse for where New Zealand's at on the, what are we, the 18th of August or whatever it is today.
What's the number one issue, Winston, for New Zealand right now?
No, I'm going to deal with the three waters first. Well, can I just say, it's breathtaking. I'm in a meeting of financial services and your advisors in terms of a critical asset issue. Three Waters was never about fixing the water. No. It was about a racist asset grab for Maori. That's its purpose. And here you have in the South Island, what the purpose was, you have this small group called Ngāi Tahu, and all the rest of South Island would get 50% of the vote, and they'd get 50% of the vote, and Ngāi Tahu would, but it had to be a 75% decision. Right there you've got a veto and got control. It's like in the cartoon about who controls the water, controls the people, happening right under our face, and no one darn well knows. And this campaign is not exposed enough of that, because the mainstream media have refused to go along with a narrative to go report a different narrative to the one that they were bought off with a $54 million bribe. You were there. You know what happened when they were bought off by the sort of public interest journalism fund. And here we're staggering here 7 weeks from an election, and everybody is wondering what's going on. Well, what's going on is a design to change the very democratic fabric of this country, and that, I tell you, Ms. Smalley, is the number one issue in this election.
I've just had a question drop here that says, ask Winston how he's going to stop ram-raiding youth crime.
I'm going to make sure, first of all, there's enough frontline police, and Mr. Faafoi will tell you that we got 2,338 extra frontline police in breathtaking time, but they weren't out doing the job. And second, the Minister of Police, not his fault, but the courts and, dare I say, our higher authorities decide they'll have a fishing policy when they catch these people. They'd catch and release them. Not do what we should do. Get out there, catch them, and make sure mum, dad and their caregiver is in the juvenile court when they next appear. Start with imposing self-control, which is essential to the Pacific and, dare I say, the Maori world, where the biggest problem is.
So he's sounding like ACT again, isn't he?
No, I'm not sounding like that, because the ACT Party has no such policy like that.
It's going to be a very strong government.
Imitation's the greatest form of flattery. Don't believe what you hear in there.
ACT actually does have a policy, Winston, and we're the toughest party on crime. And this society is going to degenerate into something shocking if we don't get a grip on this very shortly. And it's, if that means youth offenders who can walk into a supermarket and take $400 worth of goods and just walk past the security guard are allowed to continue in this, or ram raid, they need to be contained, and they need to be either put in a program, or they're going to go to jail. It's very hard to get into jail in this country. You need to commit a lot of crime. But, serious crime to get, so it's not something that can happen easily. But once you're in there, you get institutionalized. And when you come out, there's no program for rehabilitation, so that's part of our strategy. But to have a government target that sets 30% of catch and release of prisoners out back into the community, it terrorizes the communities again. ACT's policy is very simple. The victim is at the centre of everything that should be around the justice system, and not being soft on the criminals.
Kris Faafoi, Mark Mitchell's line I hear every time the man opens his mouth is soft on crime. This government's soft on crime. Is that the reality here? We're talking about cost of living maybe being one of the deciding factors in this election, crime as well.
Yep, it was a number 2 issue in the polling that I showed on Tuesday. Winston has already talked about the numbers of police that have come online in the last 6 years. Again, to there's always two sides to the story. Yes, you've got to make sure there's punishment, but what are the conditions that lead to these youngsters getting into the position where they're doing? So you can have a lock 'em up policy, but actually there's got to be prevention there as well. That is happening, and making sure youth crime. I'm not chasing votes, but there's always something policy going on to stop youth getting into crime. It's more complex than the 13 and a half minutes that we've got left, but I can guarantee it's going to be bandied around over the next 6 or 7 weeks. There's no one band-aid, no one silver bullet. And again, if we want to see the continual factor of young kids going to prison or getting in trouble, then we'll keep doing what we've done. And again, it's another place where housing, education and health all comes into play to make sure that these kids aren't out on the streets doing what they're doing.
Luxon's talking about boot camps, I think. Damien, I think X talking about anklets, among other things.
Yeah, I mean, anything that can prevent a kid going back to his house and getting out of the window at 2 a.m. To do it again.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bigger issue here, though, about...
but you have to deal with the fundamental behaviours, yeah. Just on another issue, because Simon's going to save the world. He's going to China shortly.
That's right.
And he's going to ruin his liver drinking Chinese whiskey.
Motai.
But he doesn't know that yet. But income to this country now is vitally important. We need to be a trading nation again. We need to stop inflating all the costs in our system. And if you guys can help with that in terms of our biggest problem in this country is productivity. We're not producing enough. We're benchmarked against Australia. 40% of our salaries are higher over in Australia than here. We've lost 1,000 jobs at Fisher and Paykel to Brazil. We're now got an OCR which is the 5th worst in the world, in the OECD after Poland, Chile, Colombia, and Hungary. Now that's not good company, right? So, from a finance professional's point of view, we all need to get a grip on just making the government constrained on its spending profile, and we need to actually bring income into this country. And the Green Party and the Tamarian Party are actually extremists at an economic fundamental level. They want to tax us to oblivion. They don't want to see anything produced. No, the Green Party's the only species they're interested in saving is themselves, right? And this climate change fiasco where we're getting suckered by big corporations like BlackRock. No, sorry, I need to put this on the record. Where that $2 billion fund that was announced, this is a good example, Simon, has not even been raised yet. And the Act's policy is pretty clear. If our top 5 trading partners has the same environmental profile as us, that's fine. We're competing on a level playing field. And I think James Shaw and the Green Party have set us back where corporations have become reliant on environmental schemes that are disadvantaging the country. And we're all for being green. We don't accept the Carbon Zero Act. We think the ETS can do it. But the cost of petrol in a mum and dad's car is the most important thing. And we need to be back mining resources in this country.
Kris, your response to that?
Me?
Yes. As you're ploughing a lonely furrow on the left here.
Again, the proviso, I'm not chasing votes. But I think the challenge of climate change is well and truly upon us. I think we're well past the point where all New Zealanders want to see action. Everyone's got their different take on it, but it has to be addressed. As a parent, I worry about the country that they're going to live in. We had a presentation from a gentleman from NIWA this morning that gave us in pretty stark terms what's going to happen to this country over the next 20 years on an annual basis. I used to be the Minister of Civil Defence, and I got the sense that these things were just increasing all the time. So, and if we don't deal with this, and be seen to deal with this,
we can't kick the can down the road, as we say a million times. Yeah. Absolutely. Winston.
Look, can I just say something? I'm at a financial services conference, which has had the Reserve Bank here. But some time ago, I predicted the preview would disclose that there's a $20 billion hole that's in our economy, and that'll be disclosed over the next 4 years, that is, because that's what the preview is about. It's not about next year. It's about forward as well. Now, some commentators typically just laughed at that, who wouldn't know what day it is when it comes to the economy, frankly. But that's what's going to happen. Now, here's the real point. Why are we hearing these announcements for 3 tunnels going across under the harbour and then up to the north, and then other policies putting out $45, $50 billion plans into the future when they have no idea how we're going to fund it, or don't understand what it is critically about the deficit, where consumption is a waste and productivity and wealth creation is your only long-term angle. That's what I'd like to see in this campaign, some real substance, not people say, I'm going to fix it, and your next question is, and in your profession, like yours and like mine, the number one thing you've got to learn is to ask good questions and never leave off until you've found the answer. We need to be asking them, yes, so how is it going to work? And that's what you were saying, Simon. We need to hear far more substance debate. So what's your policy and how are you going to do it and what's going to cost? And we're not hearing it.
I want to just bury down into a couple of things which is relevant to this audience. Kris, you would have been involved, I think, with the some of the credit regulations that were, well, certainly Christopher Luxon says he'll be rolling those back. Some concerns about that, certainly when Christian Hawkesby was talking before as well, that we go back to being a bit of the Wild West. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's say we made the changes to the CCCFA. I curiously kind of talked about that earlier in the week, about some of the red tape that may have come about from that. But still, fundamentally, I think we need to make sure we have better protections in place for consumers than we did originally. There are always going to be horror stories, but the kind of horror stories that we had before we made the changes to the CCCFA about the most vulnerable consumers, it was the Wild West. There was a bit of a tinkering in 2014, but we really needed something that was substantive, whether or not you agree with it. That came in through the changes to the CCCFA. So if they make changes, then I'd like to, my perspective is making sure that there are some pretty robust protections there for consumers still.
Okay. Simon, Christopher Luxon announced that split in KiwiSaver. You can diversify, I guess, your portfolio. What do you make of that? Yeah,
look, I mean, I think, as you said, I've seen them in the news media. Those announcements look good. I think really what we've been having here just in the last few minutes discussion about productivity. And I have to say, having been with a huge raft of business in the last week and talking about these things, is a very big concern for business. It still surprises me at a level given the immigration numbers we've got, but there's still a very clear sense from business across the board that the skilled workers aren't there, that we still need to upskill and bring in new skilled workers. I agree with Damien, overseas investment's incredibly important. I think we do need to see an overhaul of our regime in that regard. I think the other one I would say is, look, we still have a big problem in this country around technology and utilisation of that. And, I just think that's why I'm going to Israel at the end of this year, with Israel, Singapore, Ireland. We need to be much more like those countries if we want to retain our best and our brightest, actually all of our Kiwis in this country. When we're talking about shoring up our future, investing in ourselves or retirement, KiwiSaver seems that everybody is just tinkering with it. Everybody's tinkering around the edges. Why not be bold? Why not bring in compulsion? I was one of about 8 people, Winston, who voted for your referendum. And what was it, about 99?
It was in 97, and we were going to give you an 8 and then increase to 10% tax cut, but you had to put it in a sovereign fund of your own in your own name. All right. That was the plan, and I got smashed by the media. They voted me down, but they didn't vote away the problem.
I didn't agree with much you were saying at that time, but I did agree with that, and I did vote for it. Good idea. Yeah, look, I think the overall ultimate point that actually a number of us have been making on this panel is my basic thesis: New Zealand's got some big challenges and problems that requires big, bold ideas and policies. We shouldn't be afraid of that. I get concerned when I think the major parties are a bit afraid of that. Are they, Winston?
Well, you've got a paradox here, and I suppose we can give an independent or neutral view on this. The essence of conservatism is savings, always has been. So why would the Conservatives be against a savings fund? Look, Norway gets oil the same time as Maggie Thatcher's England. Norway puts it in a sovereign fund and they're super wealthy. Maggie has tax cuts and they're not wealthy, are they? So that's what happened there. And then we inherited, and sorry to give history lesson, but it's 1975 and the Labor government has got a compulsory saving plan. It has two serious defects. One is that mainly women weren't included, and second, it never matured until 5 years from now, 2028. But they could have been fixed up. But of course, the National Party, of which I was a member, campaigned to get rid of it. And the rest is history. But ask Singapore, ask countries like Norway about long-term savings. It's essential. I don't understand why we have this party political debate on what is a sound, smart, forward-thinking idea. It also has this great effect if you have savings in people's names. You change the way they think. They go from being not interested until they can online computer check every 6 months, I'm making progress, I'm making progress. You'll change their whole economic outlook. So why we haven't done it, I don't know. But it was turned into a lousy political attack. Shipley used it a chance to roll Jim Bolger.
I mean, just to complete this on this, you can have a great idea that's the right policy and the wrong timing. I suspect compulsory super in a cost of living crisis isn't a heck of a good political sales job at the moment. We've been talking about crime. I remember I had a brilliant idea called Strike Force Raptor.
That one.
If I brought it in now, they'd lap it up.
Strike Force
Raptor. Worked in Sydney.
I'm going to go around you all. Election's going to, first of all, what's the makeup of the next government? And what's the election going to be won and lost on? Damien?
I think people have got a very stark fundamental choice. It's time for a real change. It needs a party like ACT, because if we allow National just to shadow Labour like they've done over the years, it becomes a unipolar sort of system. So I think the time is right now for you to express yourselves in lowering taxes, keeping your own money, working hard, and allowing productivity to be boosted in this country. Social cohesion is very simple at the ACT Party. Everybody's equal. You get one vote per person. It is a democracy. And I do agree with Winston, it's under challenge. And I don't know what the forces are behind that, but it's up to us to stop that.
I think the idea of change has the advantage, but that said, it will be very close. I think in the end, it's going to require three parties to be in government and watch the debates. They may well be decisive.
I agree the debates will be decisive. I think you've got two relatively new leaders. I think there's an agenda or a narrative already being set that's going to be difficult to turn around.
Winston?
How much time have I got?
Minute.
A minute. Well, I can say it much quicker than that. The reality is that this election is going to be won by the political parties who are best in contact with the electorate, but more importantly understand that when they give people solutions, they're not going to believe bull dust this time. They want to know what is the substance of what you're saying. So I'm very, very confident of the outcome of the next election, extremely confident. But what my party's purpose is to say this. We want to see not just a change because it's our turn now, because you're entitled to ask the question, our turn to do just what? We want a much better government that turns this country's social slide and economic slide around and starts taking us back to when the first world leaders, which we once were. And you know who to vote for to get that, don't you?
Very quickly, given this election is so close, wouldn't this have been a great opportunity? Should we be, like the Australians, a 4-year term? Can you actually get stuff done in 4 years versus 3? Damien, 3 or 4?
4.
Simon?
I'd vote for 4 if there was a referendum tomorrow. I don't know that it makes a massive difference.
Chris?
4.
Winston?
Look, I announced that policy in Chicago last week. You never heard about it. No. But I said this. If all these political parties are so confident of winning, then all agree now, and the bill could go into Parliament tomorrow, be passed all readings tomorrow, but make it subject to the caveat that the voters get to decide in a referendum. And we'll get a 4-year Parliament, and we'll get 4-year council, because what we got now is a waste of money and not enough time to do the job.
Correct.
Ladies and gentlemen, there we will leave it. Thank you so much for all of your time.
you.